you have spent so much time in your work with people who are either at the end of their life or who are dying or who pass on. You have witnessed countless near-death experiences, and you have so much wisdom to teach us. Have you ever had a near-death experience?
I hesitate to call it near death just because I was actually unharmed. I think I didn't have an injury per se, but
What happened?
I was. This was in 2010, so I'd been in academia in all my trainings and practices, and ultimately in faculty and all that at the University of Virginia after my training at the University of Colorado. So 17 years of just this very inside the box Western medical mindset. Here's the drugs that are going to save the world. Here's the disease. Here's the drug. All of that paradigm. I was developing chemotherapy, and I was using vitamin A compounds to kill cancer. And so that was my world. And I found myself very depressed during those last few years as I started to watch the pharmaceutical companies placing blocking patents to keep these drugs from getting to market. And that was the beginning of a journey into kind of the unfortunate reality that we actually have a healthcare system that's really dominated by the need to manage disease instead of cure or heal. And so that was a pretty dark situation. I was in a couple $100,000 of school debt. My kids were, heading towards college soon. I was, I had no money, no savings account. I was working paycheck to paycheck. I was getting paid $70,000 a year in a university setting as a faculty member, a doctor, 2 sports specialties. And so I was just like trapped. I was financially trapped. I was energetically, emotionally trapped. And in that depression, I started just calling out, for help, I think, to the universe of like, show me the other path, because this is a dead end and I can't figure out my way out of here. I worked too long to become the expert that I am. I can't imagine what I would do next. I can't spend, any more money. I need to start making money, but I don't know how to make money. And then a day came where the universe answered, and I just got this huge amount of information into my experience of like this huge path that I was here to embark on. And I felt amazing. I was like plugged into the universe for the first time in my adult life, I think. And I just felt all of this clarity and all these things. And a couple of weeks later, we had the largest snowstorm in Virginia. And I've never told this story on a podcast, so I'm not sure how this is going to go. But we had a huge snowstorm, and I heat my home that I built with my family and kids. It's a log home in the woods of Virginia, and I heat it by firewood. And so I went out to chop a bunch of firewood in the morning before I went to the hospital. And so I was working in the dark, like 5 a.m, and chopping wood, carrying an armful of wood. I slipped and fell, and a piece of wood separated my ribs on the left, which is kind of a tearing of all the muscles between the ribs. So it was just a lot of chest pain. Nothing was broken, but it was just pain. And so I finished working and got all that wood in there. And then I come back to the vehicle, which I'd borrowed my brother's 4-wheel drive because this massive snowstorm had been forecast. And so we had 22 inches of snow. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, used to driving in snow, no problem. But snow's half an inch in Virginia, nobody drives.
But you've also now got a hair between 2 ribs thanks to the firewood that like just basically lodged itself into your side.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate slip.
So that you didn't, you're not talking like you don't have like a wedge of wood.
No, not at all. It was internal. What's happened is it's now sending a lot of visceral chest pain through my body, which sets you up for the event that's about to happen. So I'm having that chest pain, and I jump in the vehicle. I'd brushed it off cursory because I'm starting to run late to get to the hospital, and knew I'd be one of the few doctors there. So in a rush to get there. And so I drive slowly for the 6 miles to get to the highway, and you're driving over just pristine, untouched snow. And it's just like driving on marshmallows. It's beautiful. Get to the highway. It's been plowed. So I call my wife, said, I'm fine. I'm made it to the highway. It's plowed, totally empty highways. So I zip up to 60 miles an hour, and I start to relax, and the heaters are on, defrosters, my body temperature shifts, and I've got this left side chest pain, and I suddenly do have something called a vasovagal event, where all my blood vessels suddenly dilate through me relaxing, change the temperature, the chest pain, all that, and I passed out instantly. And I woke up in a river with no evidence that there was any civilization around, and I felt amazing. I felt like I had just been rebirthed. Like there was just this bliss state. And I thought I had disappeared into a different universe or a different timeline of humanity. I don't know what happened, but I was on highway, and now suddenly it's just river. And it's an ecosystem I've not seen in this area before. It just looks different. And there's 20 inches of snow. And my first thought was like, wow, I just didn't picture snow in heaven. Like, that's a lot of shoveling for eternity, it seems like. So I was just having this funny moment of like, not what I pictured, but it was beautiful. Sun was filtering through, and it was just overwhelmingly white and peaceful.
And you were just you, no car, no nothing.
I'm in the car in a river. Yeah. I look down in my lap and my cell phone's sitting there, and time sitting right on it. I pull up my last call. So it'd been 7 minutes that I had been out, which is a very long time for a vasovagal event. It's usually a couple seconds. And so I don't know what happened during that time, and it's not very important, but I experienced for a moment what I'd seen my patients do, which is felt myself for the first time as an adult, or as a young child. I hadn't probably been in that state since I was, 2 or a little bit before. The lack of fear, guilt, and shame, the lack of any sense of I'm incomplete, to the sense of I am here in this new universe, and I've landed somewhere in space time, and I've landed in this thing, and nature is dazzling me, and I feel amazing. My body was like, I was not experiencing that chest pain. I was just like, I was in an ecstatic state. And so, again, whether it's just passed out, I have no idea. But the state of being was, I think, what set into motion my next few years. From there, I actually went and I left the university months after that and started to realize all of the companies and dreams that had been shown to me a couple of weeks earlier. And in that journey, I got a third subspecialty in hospice and palliative care. And so I was running a nutrition center for reversing chronic disease through food as my kind of part of realizing my dream. But to pay the bills, because I wasn't making any money in clinic, I was working as a part-time medical director for a hospice. And in that, I was admitting 80 patients a week to die. And when you do that for 4 years, that adds up to a lot of death and dying. And I had this new anchor point of, I remember what it feels like to be without fear, guilt, and shame in my body. I remember the elation of being whole for a moment. And I remember how fast I fell out of it too, as the day unfolded. And what had happened is I had passed out on the highway, and I climbed out of the river. I was soaking wet in my doctor's outfit, and climbing up through all this snow, and thought I was like in a wilderness. And then suddenly got up to the top of this embankment, and Highway 29 was right there. There's no cars on it, just empty. And then there's a man standing right in the middle of the lane.
A man?
A man. And he's a state trooper hat, the whole thing, no car in sight. So then I was like, oh my gosh, maybe this is like the gates of heaven or something. And this is obviously St. Peter. And of course I would make him a state trooper in my mind. And so I'm like having this complete existential experience. And it starts to get really ridiculous in those next few minutes, because he looks at me so confused, but very earnest. He never cracks a smile. He's looking at me climbing over this bank, and I've got my doctor badge on, and I'm in loafers and dress shirt and everything else. So I'm like crawling out of the woods. He's staring at me, and he's like, son, how did you get here? And so then I'm like, oh shoot, this is my resume. Like, I got to get into heaven here. Like, I got to figure out what have I done well. So I started literally going through my life. Like, well, I grew up in this little church in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm the oldest of 3 kids, and I was a great big brother, and I was this, and then I did this, and missions work in the Philippines and birth babies, and I'm a doctor, I'm a great dad, and my kids are in ballet and fencing, and I'm doing this stuff. And he's looking more and more concerned, which makes me feel like I'm failing the test.
Yeah, now this guy is a drunk driver.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, this guy's on drugs at 7 o'clock in the morning, driving through snow or whatever he's doing. Anyway, long story short, he finally stops me. He says, son, how did you physically get here? And so I just got really angry all of a sudden, because I was at the end of my wits. It was just like, how the hell did you get here physically? And he, to his credit, then suddenly burst out laughing. He's like, that probably looks confusing as well. And he says, my patrol car's down around the corner of the highway. And he said, I got a call on my radio that somebody got off the highway, and I was looking for you. And how did you get here? And I said, well, my vehicle's down in that river. I don't know how I got there. He's like, well, let me show you what I just saw. And so he takes me back around the corner of the highway, and you can see where my vehicle drifted off the highway at 60 miles an hour and jumped a 6-foot embankment of snow that had plowed over the guardrails. And the vehicle had dropped about 30 feet off this cliffside, and then landed on 2 wheels and drove for about maybe 30 meters, and then settled onto 4 wheels on this steep embankment. Drives nearly a quarter mile around the corner on this embankment, finds the only break in the trees, takes a 90-degree turn, drives down into the river without touching a tree. And that's where I woke up. And so when he showed me that, I started to get this overwhelming experience of like, I just had an experience that was outside of my physical plane. There's something happened to me that can't be logicked, and I was extremely logical human being. Like I wanted to understand everything I was seeing all of the time. That's what made me a great scientist and doctor and everything else, and this was just something that was so outside of the mental constructs that I could put nothing together for this. And it was exactly what I needed. I needed an experience that was so radically outside of my human mind that it would lead to a deeper state of surrender to my path, whatever was going to happen next.
I love that the trooper showed you the accident. And here's why. When you described your car drifting off, jumping a 30-foot embankment, landing on two wheels, then driving a quarter of a mile, then taking a 90-degree turn through two trees that it missed and ending up in a river, and you were largely unscathed, but left with a profound near-death experience that changed your entire life. And you do strike me as somebody who is extraordinarily smart and logical, that you needed the universe to deliver something unexplainable to wake you up to the reality that there's something bigger going on, and you're going to be the one to figure it out.
I wish I could say I was that easy to teach, but the universe was about to see how stubborn my human mind was. And so they actually managed to lift that vehicle out of the river by its back bumper with two tow trucks on different sides of the river. And so the vehicle was suspended 100 feet in the air and came across back onto the highway and set down on its front bumper. The state trooper pushed on the roof just slightly, and it just like started to tip down onto its wheels. They lowered it down onto the four wheels. I got in, started up. There wasn't a scratch on the car, not a scratch on me.
You drove to the hospital after that?
Drove to the hospital. So again, this is a situation where nothing is running in the town, so I knew it would be more time. And by this time, it had been 45 minutes, and I needed to get to the hospital quick. And I was fine. I was like unharmed, feeling actually amazing in my body and my spirit. And so I drove and worked a 12-hour day, saw 700 patients that day. Just like we only had like 6 doctors running the entire medicine floors, and so it was a busy day. Got home that night. And by that night, I had already gotten disconnected from the experience. And so I was already back in my mind because I thrust myself right back in, got to do everything, got to save the world, duty, responsibility. This is what makes me valuable as a human being, is I can go and work my ass off in a hospital. And so by the end of the day, I'd already lost touch with it. And so here's probably one of the most important events of my life. And it only took 12 hours in the hospital to disconnect me from that event. So I went home that night. I hadn't told my wife much of what had gone on because I didn't want her to worry. So I got home, told her that night, and fell asleep like 11, and the phone rings at 6 a.m. And I pick it up, and this is Lieutenant so-and-so. I'm looking for Dr. Bush. I'm like, oh, this must be the accident yesterday. Yeah, this is Zach Bush. He's like, we need you in Haiti, Port-au-Prince in 6 hours. And I was like, wait, who are you? This is Lieutenant so-and-so from the U.S. Navy, and we've got you on the top of our list for large-scale emergency relief. There was just a huge earthquake in Haiti, and we're sending the Navy ship Comfort into the bay right now. We need you on that ship to run a hospital ward. I was like, I'm not in the Navy, but I had trained a couple years earlier and deployed a large group for emergency relief for Katrina, which had happened down in New Orleans. So that had ended me up on some Navy list somehow. And so 6 hours later, I was in Port-au-Prince Bay being dropped onto the Navy ship. And so that all happened in a 30-hour period. And so that's how stubborn I think my mind was, as I needed even a deeper schism and break from my reality at the hospital. And I worked on that Navy ship for a couple of weeks and took care of 780 women that had been crushed in that earthquake that became quite famous. But I needed to see all of that. And so the universe, in a very short period of time, took me out of my mental constructs and challenged me with a whole bunch of new realities that, again, just once I came back from that, I couldn't reintegrate.
I all of a sudden felt this tremendous sense of sadness.
Yeah.
To think that the biggest realization for most people
is at the deathbed.
Is at the deathbed.
Many of the death experiences that I've been around, in which the individual will let go of the body fully, like letting go of that egoic construct, they will journey immediately off the planet.